Hello, friends and neighbors. I'm doing a short video. I'm a little hesitant to do videos because, since my accident, I'm missing teeth. My face is broken. My mouth caves in and things like that. But you'll have to overlook that until my upcoming dental appointments. But I wanted to talk about the King James Bible and modern Bible translations. And the reason I'm talking about this is because that is one of the most frequent questions I get about Bible study is which Bible version should I use? And then the other reason I want to address that is because there are a group of people called the King James only people who believe that if you are not reading the King James, you're not reading a real Bible. And that's a pretty harsh accusation to make, especially to new Christians who are trying to do the right thing. So I want to talk about that. I've researched this several years ago, but in preparation for this, I wanted to refresh my memory. And so I've done about 10 hours of hard research. I've read a couple of books. I have dug into manuscripts, where they came from, what version used what manuscript, where did that manuscript come from, over and over and over, I just kept digging deeper. So I think I can answer most of the questions. So here is what the King James only people say. These are the reasons why they say that the King James is the only legitimate translation of the Bible. And there are 6 reasons, and I'm going to read those 6 reasons off, and then I will address them one by one. Let me make sure I'm really recording. So the first one is, now you have to excuse me because I can't see well yet from the concussion. So it is a little bit of a blur. The first reason, they believe it is the only pure and uncorrupted translation, and all of the other translations are from corrupt manuscripts. Okay, so I will address that in a minute. Okay, number 2, I'm reading my notes. They believe there was something supernatural about the way the King James Version was translated, with a much greater level of accuracy than any other Bible translation. Number 3, they believe that extremely important words and phrases have been removed from the modern versions as a deliberate attempt to change the Word of God. Number 4, they believe there have never been any revisions of the King James because it was perfect from the time it was first written. They believe it is, number 5, it is completely free of Roman Catholic connection. And number 6, they disparage the 2 main translators of the modern translations as ungodly people. So, first let's look at a little bit of history. And I want to say a couple things first. If you prefer the King James Version, that is perfectly fine. This is in response to people who think it is the only version. That's what I want to address. And I want to assure people that they are really reading the real Bible. I don't want there to be any doubt about that. And the first thing I will say about that is that there are literally thousands and thousands and thousands of manuscripts. We have a 99.5% pure translation of the Bible. because of all these manuscripts. And there are errors, but there are things like maybe a misspelling, or sometimes when scribes were copying the Bible, and we have no original Bibles. They are all translations. Everything we have are translations. Some are newer than others. But when the scribes were translating, sometimes if they had a question or something, they would put a little note in the side, in the, I forgot what this is called, over here on the side. And then when someone copied it from them, sometimes they would include the little note. So there are just little things like that. But when you compare them all, we have a 99.5% accuracy. And one other thing I want to say is that there is more textual proof of the Bible and God and Jesus than there is of any other historical book on the planet. We have more proof of Jesus and the Bible than we do of Alexander the Great, but nobody questions that the literature about Alexander the Great is accurate. So we can be 100% confident that the Bibles that we have are accurate. Now, sometimes I believe there are a few translations that go a little too far off, and we'll talk about that in a minute, but we can be very confident. And one place, if you know someone who doubts the validity of the Bible and whether or not it really is accurate and we can depend on it, there's a really good book, and some of you may have heard about it. It's by Lee Strobel. It's called The Case for Christ. Lee Strobel was an award-winning legal investigative journalist, and he was an atheist, and his wife got saved. So he decided he was going to investigate this, and he would prove that there was nothing to this. And he traveled all over the world. He spoke to experts in archaeology, ancient texts, languages, and by the time he was done, he was a believer. And so a lot of the information that convinced him is in this book called The Case for Christ. And a lot of it is proof of the actual documents that we have. So that's a good book to read. So there are thousands of manuscripts, but basically it comes down to two different sets of manuscripts in our current day and age. And they are called the Textus Receptus or the Critical Text manuscript. So the Textus Receptus is basically based off of the translation of a man named Erasmus in the 1500s. The Critical Text is based off of two men from the 1880s called Westcott and Hort. The Textus Receptus is also referred to as the Byzantine text. The critical texts are also referred to as the Alexandrian text. So all of the Bible experts and Bible scholars kind of have this argument over which one is the best to use. But keep in mind, there are thousands of manuscripts and they're all kind of the same. But, okay, now that we have that background, let's go look at the first point of the King James only people. They believe it is the only pure and uncorrupted translation, and all other translations are from corrupted manuscripts. So when they say that, they are saying that the Textus Receptus is the only pure manuscript, and that's where they translate it from. And they're saying the critical text, or Westcott and Hort, are corrupted manuscripts. So any Bible that has a basis that may have come from the Westcott and Hort, they think is corrupted, and that is most of the modern translations. So that's where that comes from. So let me just give you a list of the Bibles that are based on the Textus Receptus. And that would be the King James, the New King James, the Young Living Translation, the Revised Young Living Translation, and the Geneva Bible. And then the Bibles that are based off of the critical text are Westcott and Hort, are the NLT, the NIV, the CSB, Holman's, ESV, and all of those. Now, I will say that the NSB kind of has both, the Textus Receptus and the Westcott and Hort, and so does the ESV. So I want to look at their statement that the Textus Receptus is the only pure and uncorrupted translation. The King James Version comes from that. So I want to give you a little history on the Textus Receptus manuscript. Now I also will go ahead and talk about number 5. They believe it is completely free of the Roman Catholic connection. Okay, let's throw in a little more history here real quick. When the King James Bible was written, there were already other English translations, and every other country in Europe already had translations in their language, except England. Now, the King James was not the first English translation. And this is a really good book that talks about that. It's called, and there are more, this isn't the only one, The Murderous History of Bible Translations by Harry Friedman. John Wycliffe, and I just went blank on the other guy's name. Where is it? Tyndale. Had both, they translated the English Bible long before King James. Many people lost their lives because the Catholic Church did not want the average layperson to have access to the Bible. They thought that the Bible could only be taught by those who were priests, and that the average person was not capable of understanding the Bible. And so, and when I do, I'm doing a series on the history of the church, but there were years and years of where the Catholic Church murdered millions of people because they chose something besides Catholicism and because they wanted to read the Bible. So the Bible has a terrible murderous history behind it. So people went through a lot of things and sacrificed their lives in order for us to have a Bible to read in English. So that's why there was some contention with the Catholic Church. Well, King James was the head of the Church of England, and the Church of England was a result of Britain wanting to pull away. It probably wasn't called Britain then, it was England. Wanted to pull away from the Catholic Church, and it's because I believe the former king wanted a divorce so he could marry his girlfriend, and the Catholic Church wouldn't give it to him. So that's why they ended up leaving the Catholic Church. They started the Church of England. So here comes King James. He is now the head of the Church of England. And there was a English Bible that was extremely popular. It was called the Geneva Bible. Well, King James hated the Geneva Bible because the Geneva Bible had a lot of strong opinions in their footnotes. It was a good translation, but there were a lot of study notes in there, and it was very against the monarchy or even the Pope. They believed that the average man should govern themselves and study and worship God on their own without government control. And just as the Pope back to the very first pope, Constantine. Constantine was the emperor, and he became the head of the church. He formalized Christianity. It became Catholicism. He was the emperor. He was also the head of the church. And later the Catholic Church said he was the first pope. But the Church of England, their royalty, their leader, also was the commander of the church. So they were both in the wrong. So anyway, King James did not like the Geneva Bible at all, and someone approached him about printing his own Bible, and he didn't go for that at first. But he had a political problem amongst the Christians in the land, and that was between the Puritans and the Church of England. There was a lot of fighting and disagreements, so they called together a conference to try to work something out. And someone suggested that they print a Bible that both sides were agreeable to and that everyone could read that Bible. And so that's how the King James Bible came about, to get rid of the Geneva Bible, which was anti-monarchy, and to try to stop political fights between the Puritans and the Church of England. There was nothing inspirational about it. It was a problem solver. So what I did is I just Googled, which, I could have bought some books and found it, but I just searched what manuscript was the King James Bible based on. Now, the King James only people like to believe that the translators, and what they did is they had a huge amount of translators. They weren't all language experts. They took people from the Puritan side and people from the Church of England side, and they divided them into committees. And they each were given a certain number of books of the Bible, and it was their job to translate those. And they were supposed to do it individually. Now, there is a lot of legend around this, but there's very little proof of how it actually happened because there are very few records. But anyway, they worked on them individually, and then they talked about them collectively, and then those groups submitted it to another group, and they all talked about it. But they did not translate them from straight Hebrew and straight Greek, like the King James only people like to believe. They translated them from other translations. So it was not a pure translation. It came from other translations. And there's all kinds of proof of this. You just have to look it up. So it is well known that they used the 1958 Textus Receptus manuscript that was translated by a man named Theodore Bezas, B-E-Z-A-S. And they also used the Latin Vulgate, which comes from the Westcott and Hort side that the King James people don't like, because there are some phrases from there. So then I searched what manuscripts did Theodore Bezas use for his 1958 Textus Receptus. And I found out that he translated it from the Stephanus 1550 manuscript. So then I searched, what is the Stephanus 1550 manuscript? And it was translated by a man named Robert Estienne. His Latin name was Stephanus. He was a printer. His father was a printer. He was a royal printer. And he had revised it several times from this. So our pure manuscript came from Theodore Bezas, 1598 manuscript. He got his from a Robert Estienne, the Stephanus manuscript, that had been translated and revised several times. So then I searched, and I won't go real far with this because it's long, but I want you to understand that it did not come from one pure manuscript. Stephanus translated from the Complutensian polyglot, which were Vatican manuscripts, hence Catholic. Remember, the King James only people said there's no Catholic influence. And manuscripts from the Royal Library. So then I Googled, where did Stephanus get his 15 Greek manuscripts from? And that's where I found out it came from the Royal Library. And that it was primarily based on a text by a man named Erasmus. And some places when you look, you'll say, where did the King James Version manuscript come from? A lot of people will say it was based on the Erasmus text, but there were several steps between Erasmus and the King James. So who was Erasmus? Erasmus was a Catholic monk. Who was kind of sympathetic towards Lutheranism, but he still was loyal to the Pope. He was a humanist. Do you know what a humanist is? A humanist is someone that believes we can do good on our own through mankind, that we don't need God. He combined Christianity with philosophy. So if you'll remember, one of the points of the arguments against using anything but King James is that all the other manuscripts were based off these two people called Westcott and Hort, and that they were ungodly people. And they did have some serious problems. But their guy, the King James only guy, Erasmus, was a humanist who combined Christianity and philosophy. So he was not a godly man, as we would consider one to be. So his Greek New Testament was published in 1516 in Switzerland. So then I Googled, where did Erasmus get his sources for his Greek New Testament? And his source was the Latin Vulgate from the Vatican and numerous Greek manuscripts. The 8 Greek manuscripts, I'm almost done with this. The 8 Greek manuscripts that he used were from the Dominican Library of the Catholics. And there are some Latin passages in there. So then I Googled, where did the Dominican Library get their manuscripts? And I found out they got him from a cardinal, a Catholic cardinal named John of Ragusa. John of Ragusa was born in 1380, and he entered the Dominican order in adulthood. By 1420, he had the position of Master of Theology at the University of Paris. Pope Martin V made, I think that's the 10th. I forgot my Roman numerals. Made him a cardinal. So he went on a trip for the cardinal to Constantinople to try to join together the Western churches and the Eastern churches, because the Eastern churches, Catholic churches, had split off and they were called Eastern Orthodox. So while he was there, he was unsuccessful. When he came back with 6 Greek manuscripts. They don't know if he stole them or if he was given them. And before his death, he donated them to the Dominican order at Switzerland. And that's as far back as I could go. And all of these manuscripts, none of them are older than 1,200 years old. So it's 1,200 years from the time of Jesus before these manuscripts were created. So, as we can tell, the King James is not the only pure and uncorrupted translation there were many revisions of the document that it was based on. It came through many revisions, as we just talked about, and there was Catholic influence all over them. Okay, the next point, they believe there was something supernatural about the way the King James was translated and a great level of accuracy. Well, we already know there's absolutely zero proof of that. There was nothing supernatural about the creation of the King James Bible. It was political, and it was a little bit of revenge against the Geneva Bible and how they put down the monarchy. So there was nothing supernatural about that. Now here is, and we talked about the two main translators. We have the Textus Receptus, and then we have the critical text, Erasmus versus Westcott and Hort. Westcott and Hort have some real problems, but so does Erasmus. So that leaves one of the most important problems that people today have with the King James and the modern translations. They believe that extremely important words and phrases have been removed from the modern versions as a deliberate attempt to change the Word of God. Mm-hmm. And that is the thing that I hear the most. And there is an explanation for that. In 1200, 1300, 1400, 1500, when these manuscripts were written that were a base for the King James Bible, that was the best manuscripts they had to work with. There was 1,200 years from their manuscript back to Jesus' time. So that was the best they had to work with. They had to assume, and thousands of them matched, they had to assume they were fairly accurate because there were thousands of them everywhere. And there's other proof that you'll find like in the book that I told you about by Lee Strobel. But those missing passages have upset so many people. Like one of the things is the King James, there's a passage where it calls Mary a virgin, or a virgin would give birth, and this is in the Old Testament. Well, in some of the newer modern translations, it puts young woman, and people are hysterical because they're saying that the newer versions are deliberately trying to take away the divinity of Jesus, his miracle birth. And there's other, like where it says it left out the blood, or, there's a whole list of things that are different between the King James and the newer ones. And there is a perfectly good explanation. Nothing has been removed. What has happened is that, especially with the finding of the Dead Sea Scrolls in 1945 near Qumran, we have much older transcripts now, and they all match. And it shows that some of these phrases were added in later, because the Hebrew word that is used, where it goes whether virgin or young woman, the Hebrew word means young woman. It does not mean virgin. That was added in later by a translator. It doesn't take away from the virgin birth, because we read about the virgin birth in other places. It's not like they went in and took away every instance or every remark of the virgin birth. They just corrected that translation to what it was supposed to be. And all of the other phrases that appear to be missing were phrases that were added in later by translators. And now that we have older, much, much older, like 1,000 years older than what they had around the King James time, we can have a more accurate idea of what the scriptures said in their original manuscripts. So there is no deliberate attempt to remove any passages in the modern versions. The modern versions are based on more recent manuscripts that have been found recently that are much older than what the King James used. So, here is my recommendation. And there's a lot more information on this. If you have any questions at all, ask me. I've got tons of notes, and there's all kinds of resources if you want to check out anything that I've said. My recommendation is to have more than one translation. And one other thing that I wanted to say was that in 1 Corinthians, Paul is talking about speaking in tongues. He's telling them, he's teaching them that when they speak in tongues in the church, that to not speak in tongues in the church unless there is an interpretation, because he says if no one can understand what you're saying, then it is a waste of time. There is no need that people need to be able to understand what you are saying. The Bible needs to be understood, and the King James Version uses a lot of archaic phrases and words that don't mean the same thing anymore, and nobody has a clue what they mean. I have a master's degree in education, and I have studied the Bible all my life, and I am totally baffled sometimes by what the King James Version says. And there's nothing wrong. There's nothing wrong with you if you can't understand what it says, because that is a normal thing. You need to read a Bible that you will understand. I've heard many people say, what is the best translation of Bible to have? And the answer is the one you will read. So if you have a King James Bible and you don't ever read it, it doesn't matter what translation you have if you're not reading it. So there are obvious things about the King James that are confusing. But there are things that the language experts call false friends. In other words, it's words in the King James that no longer mean the same thing, and we may not know that. When we read it, we are interpreting it through 21st century language. And let me give you some examples. Like the King James uses the word bowels. The current meaning is intestines. But the meaning during King James time, or during the Bible, when the Bible was written, the bowels mean the seat of your emotions. And so that's totally different than your guts. So when you see the word bowels in a verse in the King James Bible, you're thinking about your guts. I mean, how does that make sense? Another example is the word remove. There are passages in the Bible where it uses the word remove. Well, we think that means take away. It doesn't. In the Hebrew Bible, it means to move something. Don't take it away, just move it. Another word is incontinent. We think that means to lose control of your bowels. Do you know what it means in the Bible? It means no self-restraint. So whoever it is in the Bible, they haven't lost their control of their bowels. They have no self-restraint. Don't you think things like that are very important when it comes to understanding? The word enlargement in some of the passages. We would think enlargement means to grow or enlarge, but in the Bible it meant release from bondage. That's a totally different meaning. And there's many more. One that I found was especially important was the word communicate. We think it means to express ourselves. In the Bible, it means to share or participate. The word conversation that the King James translated, we think it means to talk or converse. The Hebrew meaning means the way you live or the way you behave. That's totally different than what we think now. So it's very, very important that the Bible be written in a language that we understand. In the King James, in England, that's how they talked then. But other Bibles that have been translated over and over and over were translated into the language that people could understand at that time on the history of time, of the timeline of history. One good example is the very, very first translation was translating. What had happened is the Israel, the Jews had come under control of the Greek, and this was before Jesus came, and so and almost everybody spoke Greek. They spoke some Hebrew. They were taught in Hebrew at the synagogues and stuff, but in everyday life they spoke Greek. Well, they needed a Bible that they could read. So the Jews translated the Old Testament into Greek, into a language that everybody could understand, and it was called the Septuagint. And that is what the Old Testament is based on now, and that is what Jesus learned the Old Testament from, was the Septuagint. And they think he probably spoke Hebrew and Aramaic also. But Jesus used the Septuagint. It was a translation in everyday language that people then spoke. And we need to have a Bible that we can understand. So my recommendation is to choose a Bible from the Textus Receptus Bibles, and choose a Bible from the Westcott and Hort Bibles, and compare them. Have more than one Bible. It is so beneficial to look up a verse in numerous, at least a couple of translations, and you can do it. I do it on my iPad. I have, let me show you real quick what I do. I have Bible software called eSword. It's, I think, $10 for the iPad. And if you can see here, whoop, if I angle it, you might be able to, oh mercy. Can you see that there? There's like 5 columns. So I have 5 different versions. You can put as many as you want, 2 or 3, and you can even pull this stuff up on online Bibles. And if I have a question about a verse, I look at it in several copies. I look at it in the King James with the Strong's words. I look at it in the New Living Testament, which is a very easy to read. I look at it in the Apostolic Bible Polyglot, which is a translation straight from Greek into English by a biblical scholar and expert who started out at SEMO at Southeast Missouri State University. It is a very, very good translation. And then the Complete Jewish Bible. So I look at a lot of them. So I would suggest that you can use like the King James or New King James if you like that. But then compare it to an NIV or an ESV. So pick a couple of translations and compare them. So I know this was a lot of information, and the reason I didn't write it out was because it just seemed overwhelming to type it all up and organize it. So I hope it hasn't been confusing. But the main points that I want to let you know is that we can 99.5% trust that the Bible is accurate. There are little differences, and some of them can be important. Like the King James took the word Passover and replaced it with Easter, which to me is a huge, huge mistake. They were celebrating Passover, not Easter. And that one thing has influenced tradition for years. So there are some differences that you might think are important. But if you're comparing more than one translation, you will find these things. And as you study and ask the Holy Spirit to help you study, He will bring things to your attention that you might need to look at a different translation. So, but the most important thing is that we can rely on the accuracy of the Bible, of the documents that support the Bible. And the second thing is that read whatever translation you want. There are a couple that I have a problem with, and that's the Passion Translation, the Message, And I'm not crazy about the Cepher, Cepher. But if you use those, that's fine. Just make sure you have another translation to bounce things against. But the most important thing is to read. We need the scripture. The only way we will not be deceived in this age of everybody having their own truth, in this age of, the Bible tells us, deception in the last days, that many who follow God will fall away because they are deceived. We have to read our Bible. So whatever you do, just read one. So I hope this has been beneficial, and thank you for listening. I love you.